To reflect on Human Rights Day, we also need to look at the rights of migrants, especially women and children. They remain vulnerable to human trafficking, slavery and forced labour. To discuss this, I'm joined by Navi Pillay, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Navi, a very good morning to you. I mean, it's been a year like no other, and I know it's impacted quite dramatically on migratory patterns. What are we seeing, though, when it comes to the abuse of, increasingly, women and children?
Yes. Well, good morning to you, Jane. Thank you for focusing on this very important subject. Now, always, whether it comes to any disaster, conflict situation or economic situation, unfortunately, it's the poorest, the most vulnerable, and that is women and children who are affected. Here with migration, it's not only a separation because the parents leave the children behind in order to seek work. You know, it's absolutely necessary for them to leave starvation conditions to seek work. Let me tell you a bit, you know, as High Commissioner, how much I struggle because there's an international convention on the rights of migrant workers and their families. But, you know, decades later, very few countries have signed up to that. The whole of Europe hasn't, South Africa hasn't. And they're all afraid about making provisions for irregular migrants. So the women and children suffer the most under the system of lack of protection. And yet, international human rights law is very clear. There is an obligation to protect not only citizens, but all the people within our jurisdiction, including migrants. The law is clear. Respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of all, including migrants.
Why do you think there is this reluctance? I mean, this movement of people happens regardless. We've been talking about remittances, for example. I mean, how much money that creates through the global economy. And if we get it right, if we look after the women and children, I mean, it's a no-brainer that everybody will grow from it.
Firstly, I think governments are concerned about the electorate. They have to deal with local anger and all the myths that go around that migrants are taking their jobs. You know, I'm looking at this globally, and this is Europe as well. They really said to me, you know, the whole of Africa is trying to come to Europe. It's not so. Migration in Africa, 70% of African migration is within Africa, and the largest share of that portion is received by South Africa. And I totally agree with what you've just said. You have to realize the value that migrants bring into the country. They've come here to work. You know, they haven't come just to settle here. They come here to work, and they are making a huge contribution. And of course, they're complaining that they're not being treated as humans. In every place I travel to in Africa as High Commissioner, do you know how they look towards us, Africans? They said to me, "You are Hollywood." So they all want to come here. Our country is an attraction to them, not only because, you know, they perceive us as prosperous, but also they perceive us as kind and welcoming.
Okay, but that perception is not necessarily true, is it, when they come here? I mean, I know that the Home Office is saying that they're going to expedite the application processes here. To broaden it out a bit, Sudan is now the 50th country to ratify the forced labour protocol. They're trying to stamp out modern-day slavery. I mean, we've got to tackle all of those issues, don't we, while respecting their rights.
We do, and you know what? Actually, we should be following the AU initiative, which is progressive. It's working towards a progressive border agenda, free trade and free movement, and we seem to be moving in the opposite direction of going towards restrictions. Restrictions are really xenophobic because they're targeting those who are not South Africans, and they're targeting the poorest. This proposed legislation is targeting low-skilled workers. Now, what does that tell us? To me, you know, a carpenter can't lay bricks unless somebody is passing the bricks to him. So we don't want a situation where, like the apartheid system, where instead of values, they opted for their own interests, and they created job reservations. Do we really want to go that route? And I mentioned the way Africa perceives us to say they expect us to implement our constitution and be respectful and protective. As I said, they've come here to work, they're making contributions, they pay all endless dues all over. When I chaired the KZN riots in May 2015, I was commissioned, a team of us were asked by the provincial head at the time. We found that only 7 people were killed in those riots, and they were killed merely because of panic. But there was so much myths and false propaganda, and and everyone we interviewed did not hate migrants. They were not hostile to migrants. They were worried about competition. That is, the businesses were worried about competition. Some people were worried about the hiring of foreign nationals in their place. We checked that out in one factory. It was not true at all. So it's very important that we constantly investigate this and put the true facts out.